Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining Friends of the IDF today for the packed briefing we have in store for you. Everyone is limited on time, in demand, with many places to speak with, to share Israel's story. So we are going to dive right in. First, we're going to hear from the IDF itself. We have Sergeant Fay with us, who is going to give us the latest from the ground, what our soldiers are facing in this war for our home since the pause. She only has 5 minutes to be with us, but we're grateful to have her time. And then stay tuned, because we have Jonathan Schanzer, the senior vice president, at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, or FDD, with us. He has some incredible insights to share with us. We're so fortunate to have him. So stay tuned for that. But first, Sergeant Fay, thank you so much for being with us. And please, the floor is yours.
Sure. Hello, everybody, and glad to be here again. Just to give you a quick update. So as of the operational pause, which Hamas broke on the morning of Friday, this past Friday, or a week ago Friday, we have returned, brought home 138 hostages. I'm sorry, 110 hostages. 86 of them were Israeli. We have 24 foreign nationals, and 138 hostages are still remaining in Hamas captivity. As of now, we are continuing our efforts to destroy, find Hamas tunnels, destroy those tunnels, as well as break down the Hamas infrastructure, and continuing with that mission. So far, we have found over 800 tunnel shafts. We have destroyed 500 of those. Hamas does continue to fire rockets from Gaza towards Israel, and we are continuing to strike back at those areas that those rockets are being fired from. Recently, we did also build an entirely new system to encourage Gazan civilians to get out of harm's way. It is a new process and a new system that includes numbers and a grid system, where we are not only just encouraging them to move away from the danger and away from Hamas as we have in the past, we're making an extra concerted effort to encourage and to allow them to actually know specific areas that we will be firing towards. And that is at a disadvantage towards us, but with our focused efforts to mitigate as much civilian harm as possible. They are getting that information, those maps, through both text messages, calls, an online portal, but also physically through leaflets and through direct communication. And we are encouraging them to continue to listen towards to IDF spokesperson Avichai, who the Arabic IDF spokesperson, continue to listen to his messaging, and we're continuing to encourage the Gazan civilians to, again, get out as much as possible out of harm's way, so that we can continue with our very important mission, which is, again, twofold: to completely dismantle Hamas, to ensure that Gaza can never again be a launch pad for Hamas attacks against Israelis, as well as to return our hostages home. I hope that was a good enough quick briefing about where we're holding, and I could let you guys go. I do want to say all of the updates that come out from the IDF can actually be found, the direct ones that are going to all the journalists, the ones that are going to the world, can be found on our Telegram. I do encourage everybody here, if you do want direct access to what information is coming out of the IDF, to follow us on social media, but the ones that come straight from our office that are immediate will be on our Telegram, which is the Israel Defense Forces Telegram channel. So I do suggest that you follow all of those, and you may not even need me anymore.
I assure you that will never ever be the case. That really was such a speedy run through of what is going on. I mean, are you able to share with us what our soldiers are facing? With respect, one follow-up question, if you have time. As you guys are as the IDF is creating spaces for civilians that are safe zones, essentially, what are our soldiers facing in upholding those safe areas? We know that this doesn't serve Hamas for the civilians to be safe. It doesn't serve their narrative. It doesn't serve their purposes. So what have our soldiers been facing in trying to protect the civilian population in Gaza?
They have been facing a hard time. It is definitely something that we are trying to find the balance and the complexity between the mission that we have in Gaza, which is to ensure, again, that we can dismantle Hamas, to ensure that our soldiers are doing the best job to their abilities to do that, but also to return them home. And as you can all understand, the complexity that lies behind that is complex. It is complex. There's no other word for it. It is something that we're trying to figure out, but we also have a responsibility as the IDF to also make sure that we're upholding the rules and regulations within the laws of war. And we're doing that to the absolute best of our ability, and we'll continue to do so as the Israel Defense Forces to both defend the Israeli people and their civilians here, but also to do whatever we can to mitigate that harm. And it's an uphill battle.
Yeah, I mean, the IDF has really gone to unprecedented lengths. I mean, I don't think there's any other army in history who has gone to the lengths that the IDF is going to right now.
Yeah, I do have to say every single thing that is happening there is based and backed on intelligence. There are very strategic moves. There's nothing done both for our soldiers' sake, but also for everyone there that is not done with a strategic, tactical, very, very intentional and focused mission. And that is something that we will continue to do, that every move, everything will be very, very focused and methodological to ensure that that we're doing the job well done.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to sharing what you've shared with us in our spheres of influence to communicate the IDF's and the soldiers' perspective amid the torrent of media that's out there. So thank you so much. We appreciate it. All right, everyone. Next, we are so fortunate to get to hear from Jonathan Schanzer, who has taken time before he jumps on a plane to speak with us. Of course, he is the Senior Vice President of Research at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, or FDD. He has an illustrious resume. He has worked as a terrorism finance analyst at the U.S. Department of Treasury, where he played an integral role in the designation of numerous terrorist financiers. He is an author and expert on terrorist groups, their mentality and strategies, and has testified before Congress against anti-Semitism and terror. He is in demand these days, defending us all on many stages. So we are honored to have him with us before he jumps on his next flight. Jonathan, can you please start by briefing us on the current situation? Give us the full complexity of what is happening in the war, the full web of what our soldiers are up against.
Thank you very much for having me. And I'll try to just break down a little bit about what we're watching right now coming out of Gaza and the rest of the Middle East, as you suggest. Obviously, we're seeing a big push right now from the IDF in towns like Jabalia and Khan Younis. Khan Younis, actually, I think really represents probably the biggest bastion of Hamas in the southern Gaza Strip. And from what we hear right now, the battles are fierce. The Israelis are reporting that they are going hand to hand, face to face with Hamas terrorists and making progress. In fact, one of the things that we heard this morning is that they discovered a massive cache. There are actually videos of Israelis carrying large rockets out of underground tunnels. So these are rockets that are not going to be fired at Israel now because the IDF has found them. So it looks like there's some pretty positive progress being made. In the meantime, there is an interesting debate that is underway inside Israel, and we're hearing a bit about it from the U.S. as well, and that is that the IDF is considering flooding the tunnels with seawater. Now, this, of course, would be a significant change in tactics that would cut down on the number of bombs that Israel drops on the Gaza Strip and on Hamas targets. But it actually may pose something of a threat as well that Israel is going to have to think very carefully about and probably consult with the United States and others. The first is that it could actually weaken the structures of the buildings inside the Gaza Strip. So the damage that Israel is trying to prevent by not dropping bombs could actually be caused by the water itself. Once you start flooding underneath buildings, you don't know what's going to happen to the ground beneath, especially in some of that sandy terrain in the Gaza Strip. So that's one thing to watch. The other thing is the concerns that have been raised about the drinking water, the fresh water that is beneath the ground in Gaza. You're going to hear about that from Hamas supporters and the like. Meanwhile, I think we're very focused, all of us, I think justifiably, on what's going on in Gaza itself. But I think it's important to note that there are other fronts that are very active on Israel's borders. Hezbollah being a primary one. Hezbollah this morning announced that they hit a radar station on the other side of the border inside Israel. Israel has not confirmed what's been hit, but we know that every day Hezbollah has fired a dozen or 24 different missiles or rockets or drones into Israeli airspace. the Israelis have responded in kind. Just to put this into perspective, I believe that there's been more than 700 different strikes carried out into Israel, or attempted strikes into Israel, by Hezbollah. Under any other circumstance, this would be a full-blown war between Israel and Hezbollah. We haven't seen anything like that since 2006. The Israelis, I think, are being asked to curtail the activity on the north. They are responding to every attack that has taken place, but they've not gone on a full offensive yet. We'll know if and when that occurs, because it'll be very different than the tit-for-tat cadence that we see right now. But in the meantime, there was a very interesting event that took place today, or I guess last night, where a soldier from the Lebanese armed forces, the actual government forces of Lebanon, was killed and several people were injured in an Israeli artillery strike. The Israelis have since said that they're investigating that, but it's fascinating to watch, because the Lebanese armed forces are not the dominant army in Lebanon, right? It truly is Hezbollah that is running the show here, and it almost feels like they're just getting in the way when the Lebanese armed forces deploy. The real fight is going to be between Hezbollah and Israel. Elsewhere around the region, we're still seeing the Houthis firing rockets at Israel. There was one that came close to a lot today. Israel's Arrow system, which is now 100% accurate so far during this war, shot down yet another long-range Houthi surface-to-surface missile. It's amazing. I was talking to someone from the IDF recently, and they were telling me that usually these kinds of intercepts, when Israel would test them in places like Alaska, it would cost $300 million. So what the Israelis are saying right now, not that they're welcoming these Houthi attacks, but they are saying, hey, we're saving money right now while we're testing the Arrow in real time. And so it's been as effective, if not more effective, than the Iron Dome system, which of course we know has been incredibly effective and has saved thousands of Israeli lives and thousands of Palestinian lives, for that matter, during this war and many others. I think, when we broaden out, we look at the entire region, one thing that I like to point out regularly is that there is one actor behind all of this, and we don't hear that actor mentioned enough in our media or anywhere else for that matter, and that is Iran is the sponsor of Hezbollah. They are the sponsor of Hamas. They are the sponsors of the Houthis. They're the sponsors of the Shiite militias in Iraq and Syria that are targeting American forces in our bases there. Iran has sparked a regional war, and it has yet to pay a price, not through diplomatic isolation, not through sanctions, and certainly not through kinetic means. And one does have to ask the question here, how much longer will Israel and the United States allow Iran to get away with this? No one seems to know the answers to that, but you do get a sense that the Israelis are running short on patience, and maybe even the United States is too. So we'll watch that very carefully, but the Iranians are absolutely testing everyone's patience right now, and they are testing the limits of their own power, which is not as great as everyone says it is. A couple of other things to just note. One is there was reports yesterday and the day before about a possible short sale of the Israeli stock exchange. A fascinating story. I'm a former terrorism finance analyst from the US Treasury. I've never seen anything of this scale before. If there was this short sale position that I think has been documented here, and it was as significant as it's being reported, it is quite possible that someone made tens of millions, maybe even hundreds of millions of dollars with advanced knowledge of the 10/7 massacre. That would be a remarkable thing to learn. And now I think the Israeli intelligence services, US intelligence, everyone's trying to figure out what the data shows. We'll be tracking this at FED, and we'll certainly be updating folks as we learn more. The last thing I thought I would mention today to FIDF is that the war, when the guns fall silent in Gaza, the war is going to continue, in my view. We've heard some statements issued by the Prime Minister's office, by the head of the Shin Bet, Ronan Bar, as well as others inside Israel. There is a determination to target Hamas leaders wherever they are, anywhere around the world, if they had any role to play in the massacre of 1,200 Israelis and the hostage taking of 240 others. That means that Hamas's external operations are going to be targeted. So what do I mean by that? Well, we know the Qataris have a headquarters of several dozen people, including Khalid Meshal and Ismail Haniya and others. They have already been identified as a possible target. And certainly now that they're not helping to release hostages any longer, I think that's fair game. I think Turkey is another country that could see some action, and the Turks are very angry that the Israelis have threatened them in this way. But we know that there are another dozen or 24 operatives that are based in Turkey. They have been planning operations. They have been financing operations. This has to stop. So either the Turks pull out what they've got, or I think the Israelis may start operating there. Other countries to watch: Malaysia, Lebanon, obviously Iran. Algeria has been rumored of late to be hosting some of the Hamas figures that have been fleeing the fighting in Gaza. There is really a long list of countries that have been very friendly jurisdictions to Hamas over the years, some of whom have been viewed as friends or allies of the United States. Some have even pretended to be friends of Israel, like the Turks and the Qataris. That has all come to a screeching halt, and I expect there to be a very interesting drama that plays out internationally when this war is over.
It's very reminiscent of the Nazi hunting, you know, when the Israelis went to the ends of the earth, you know, even years after it happened, to hold people accountable for the crimes they committed.
It is, and actually even a more recent historical example would be what happened after the Munich Olympics of 1972. There was obviously a movie that Steven Spielberg made tracking or depicting rather how the Israelis tracked some of those Black September PLO terrorists that carried out that horrific terrorist attack. Of course, that paled in comparison by number to what just happened on October 7th. So we get a sense of what may be coming if the Israelis sort of hold to their history and continue down that path. We certainly get a sense that there'll be a lot of Hamas operatives paying the ultimate price.
So one of the things that, you know, we could speak for such a long time on the many topics that you've raised just now, but one place I'd like to start anyway is talking about the media's communication of Hamas's talking points as credible and legitimate and fact, essentially, and then creating the moral equivalency that we've seen. Can you speak to, like, I've had people come up to me and say, well, you know, the Palestinian prisoners were so mistreated in Israeli jails or so forth. How would you explain to people how they should counter Hamas intel and the way that it's being presented by mainstream media outlets?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one, obviously, because, you know, people believe what they hear, and we see a lot of just really terrible misinformation and disinformation, where we see journalists openly kind of eating up the talking points provided by Hamas. I will say that some of it has to do with the fact that people, when they report on this conflict, they don't have the language, they don't have the cultural context, and quite frankly, they rely on the what are known as handlers. Right? People that are translating for the journalists when they're on the ground, whether in Gaza or in Jerusalem or in the West Bank. And so they're completely reliant upon the people that they pay. And often these are Palestinians themselves who are very sympathetic to Hamas. And that's a huge problem. And that really is about trying to fix a broken system. That's really challenging. But one thing that I'll just note here is, you know, Yahya Sinwar has been in Israeli jails, right? Yahya Sinwar, meaning the mastermind of the 10/7 attack, the man who is the most wanted right now out of the entire Hamas roster that the Israelis are chasing inside the Gaza Strip. This is a man who was actually able to receive education inside the Israeli jail system. He actually had a medical emergency brain surgery that allowed him to continue to live. And then once he gets out of Israeli jails, you see what he does. And I think that really does underscore the difference between, the people who are held against their will, right, who suffered unbelievable trauma on 10/7, and those that have been arrested for trying to stab or even successfully kill Israeli soldiers. And they're held in Israeli jails, and they are given all of the rights afforded to other people that have been, jailed in Western countries around the world. So this is certainly a narrative that is not going to be won overnight. But I do think that the IDF spokesperson's office, they're doing a much better job this time around. They're coming out with facts a lot quicker. They're showing videos a lot quicker. They're demonstrating when they're able to get into these tunnels. They're showing what's in the tunnels. They're showing the weapons that they're capturing. And they're working very closely with the United States to make sure that the U.S. fully understands what the IDF is doing, how they're operating above and beyond, and even putting some of their own troops at risk in order to make sure that the people of Gaza are treated as carefully as they can be. And so I think the Israelis should get credit for this, but we still have a long way to go in terms of making sure that the narrative is set straight.
Absolutely. What is a way that you would explain to people? You touched upon the cultural context. I know that one of the areas of expertise that you bring is the ideology and the strategy of terrorist groups. And how would you communicate to people the difference between the ideologies of these terrorist groups and how they're exploiting Western ideology in order to advance their goals? Because I think that one of the premises that a lot of people are operating from is this notion that ultimately we all want the same thing. Ultimately, we all want to live our own lives in peace and freedom and live and let live. Can you expound upon that, the ideology that we're dealing with and why it's so difficult for Westerners to react to it?
Sure. I mean, there are a couple of things at play here. One, you have to understand Hamas's ideology is rooted in its three prongs, right? One is fierce Palestinian nationalism, this idea that every inch of what they call Palestine needs to be returned to Palestinian hands, and that should be fought by any means necessary, and that this is a battle to the finish as far as they're concerned for every inch of this territory. That's one. Then comes number two, which is this radical Islamist ideology. That framework is this idea that Islam must reign supreme, and that Allah, that God, promised this territory to Muslims, and that they have an obligation to win it back, not as a nationality, but as part of the Islamic nation. And so this is why you see groups like the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah and Iran and others back Hamas and support Hamas. Islamism is a very popular ideological framework in the Arab world and the broader Muslim world. And so this explains some of the sort of the cheering section that Hamas has. But this combination of nationalism and Islamist ideology is very powerful. It's a cocktail, if you will. And that makes it a lot harder to combat. And then there's one other part of it, which we're seeing a lot more of right now, which is the anti-Semitic nature of Hamas. If you look at the charter of Hamas, it is deeply anti-Semitic. They view the Jews as their enemy. By the way, they also view Christian, Judeo-Christian values. They view the American-led world order as a problem. But what they've done, which is truly shocking to see, and we can now see it really playing out on the streets of, New York and Philadelphia and elsewhere, they have embedded themselves with the far left progressives in the United States. It has taken a long time. They've spent a lot of time, I think probably since the Iraq War, since 9/11, hammering home this idea of Islamophobia being the ultimate problem in the United States. And this has really penetrated and permeated the academic space, the far left space, progressives in Congress. This is going to be an ideological battle that is not going to be won easily here, because I think for many years we've been asleep at the switch. the entire community here has not been aware of how deeply embedded Hamas and its fellow travelers have become in certain quarters of America. Not everywhere, but certainly in those sort of far left progressive spaces, we see a lot of sympathy, and that's going to take quite a bit of effort to undo.
Very, very scary. I know you only have 2 minutes, so I have 2 rapid fire questions for you. The first one is your reaction to the vote in the House that anti-Zionism is indeed a form of anti-Semitism, its significance and its importance.
Look, it's significant because I think, members of Congress are really eager to do something to show the Jewish community that they're on the right side of this. I testified a few weeks ago before the Ways and Means Committee dealing with education issues, and I saw a similar outrage from members of Congress yesterday at that hearing with the presidents of some of the worst universities. We're seeing, I think, an American Congress that is largely on board. Yes, there were a few, I think a few dozen people that voted present in that vote on anti-Semitism, which is, of course, outrageous, but we are still seeing a pretty significant majority. And I think that is a good reflection on the people's house here, and I'm glad to see it.
Amazing. And last question. We've heard Hamas leaders refer to October 7th as a dress rehearsal. Is it psychological warfare, or is it a threat, a legitimate threat?
It's both. I mean, I think we have to remember here that Hamas would like to do this over and over again. These people are truly committed to the destruction of the state of Israel, and they will take every opportunity that they can. I think right now, Israel has made it pretty close to impossible for them to carry out attacks from within Gaza. Maybe from the West Bank, it's possible, but just don't forget that even after Hamas is destroyed, the organization will still have operatives. It will still have money, even if it's based in an external headquarters. We could see Hamas try to mount attacks against Israelis or Jews, for that matter, in Europe, in the United States, in other parts of the Middle East, or from other fronts. So don't forget that Hamas is still committed, even if all of its structures are pulled apart and Hamas is completely banished from the Gaza Strip. Right? The PLO, they were pushed out of Lebanon in the early 1980s, and they continued to operate long past that. And in fact, even to this day, we still see the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades, which is a faction of the Fatah group. They're part of the PLO, and they continue to attack Israel. PFLP, the same thing, right? So even when a group is put into exile, they still will have assets that they can deploy. So we'll need to watch that very carefully.
Got it. Well, we don't want you to miss your flight. Thank you so much for being with us. You are such a wealth of information, important information, and very actionable information. So thank you for arming us with news we can use and share to affect those in our orbits. So thank you so much. We appreciate your time.
Thank you. Keep up all the great work.
Thank you. All right, everyone. The work that each of you are doing is imperative. This is the fight of our generation, and our Israeli soldiers are doing the work, as you can hear, of the entire civilized world. What happens here is going to determine the rest of the century, and we each have a role. We can tip the scales. So please consider this your call to enlist in the fight against Hamas. We need you. You chose FIDF because you want to make a difference in the outcome of this war, because you want to tip the scales towards Israel, and you're in the right place. We've already transferred over $50 million of life-saving funds. There are really rare moments in life where you as an individual can make a huge difference, and this is one of those moments. So please do everything you can so that you can say that when the Jewish state was in its time of crisis in your lifetime, that you did everything in your power to save it. FIDF is the fastest way, the most direct way to help Israel soldiers. Be their boots on the ground in America, partner with us in doing everything we can for them. They are facing the fight of their lives, and they must succeed. So thank you for being with us. Please stay with us. We will keep you connected to Israel and the soldiers, and we will be with them every step of the way. Am Yisrael Chai, friends. Am Yisrael Chai forever.